Want to watch football without the restrictions of blackouts or cable? Check out expressvpn.com to help you get access to all the live games. Sign up today using the link in the description to get 3 free months. Yo, what up, Bolt fam? It's the director. Chargers fans, well, last week was ugly. Real ugly, but the Bolts may have an opportunity to turn things around this week. This week may offer some hope in terms of turning this season around. The biggest point of emphasis in this video definitely going to be on injuries, right? We've got some really good news in terms of these injuries, maybe some pretty bad news as well. But for the most part, I think the team does have an opportunity to get some of their stars back on the field and make a statement that maybe we're down bad right now, but we ain't out. And this team definitely is going to have the opportunity to do this versus the Texans, of which, of course, last season, it was an absolute travesty in that game, giving up a bajillion yards to Rex Burkhead. This is their chance to make things right. And I do think that if the Chargers can fend off the Texans, maybe to buy themselves more time to recover for their injured stars, perhaps the win column will be just good enough by the time we start reaching the tougher slate of our games in the second half of the season to survive and hopefully make it into the playoffs for a strong push there. So should be a very interesting one today, guys. Of course, a lot of things to update you in terms of who's starting, who's coming back from injury, etc., etc. So it should be a good one. Before we do get started, guys, as a reminder, we are going to be shouting out our brand new sponsor, Underdog Fantasy. If you guys want to take a look at some of my picks for this week's slate of games on Sunday, I got a pretty good feeling on some of these guys. We hit a couple of pretty nice pockets last week. I'm hoping to hit the same this week. Remember to use code DIRECTOR to match your first deposit up to $100 when signing up for Underdog Fantasy. If you guys want to copy some of these picks here, please. In daily fantasy sports, sharing is caring, so it should be a good one there. Lastly, as a reminder, we do have a giveaway going on right now, and I think it's getting close to the deadline for it as well. We're giving away this signed Antonio Gates jersey to one of my subscribers. All you got to do to enter for this is hit up the link in the description, follow the instructions there, very simple, and make sure you are subbed. Only subs can win. But of course, we do giveaways and twos around here, so we are also giving away the signed LaDainian Tomlinson jersey to one of my crew members as a thanks from me to you guys. All you got to do to be entered for this is be a member of my crew, and that is it. Good luck to everybody. And with that, let's kick things off. Before we do, hit us up with a like and sub. If you do enjoy this Chargers content, small amount of time you guys take to hit the like, sub, and bell notification helps me out a lot. Let's get into it. Lights, camera, action. The Chargers at Texans, week 4 game preview. Let's jump right into it, guys. Of course, like we always do, let's start things off with the injury report. Now, again, very important segment this week as we do have a lot of moving pieces. And of course, I do think there are means to at least celebrate a little bit in terms of some of the stars that we do have making their way back onto the roster this week. Let's start things off here at the top, though, with a little bit of bad news, right? I like getting the bad news away, off the board first, so we can more focus and celebrate the good news. We'll start here with Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen suffered a hamstring a couple of weeks back. It felt like he was really close to a return. It felt like Brandon Staley was hinting that he would be back this game, and unfortunately during practice a couple days ago, it seems that he did retweak it and he did not practice on Friday. So as of right now, his game status is out. Now, it is a bit concerning. Of course, the Chargers have looked a lot better with him on the field versus off the field, but we have a whole segment on what to do in the absence of Keenan Allen, so we'll get that out of the way first. Next up, Justin Herbert. We've heard a lot about what the Chargers were trying to do last week in terms of keeping him protected. Of course, that did kind of blow up, and Joe Lombardi himself did admit that. But as of right now, it feels like the rib injury is trending in the right direction, getting a couple of full practices in between Thursday and Friday. Feels like the Chargers are getting a better grip on how to handle that situation. Next up, some really big news here too. J.C. Jackson did practice in a limited fashion on Wednesday and Thursday, getting a full practice in on Friday. It feels like this is going to be the game, okay? And we talked a lot about this at the top of the offseason. We're like, when we're going to see J.C. back? I was feeling it would be last week, but again, I think he may have retweaked it during week 2's game versus the Chiefs. I think this is the week that we see him back. Of course, it wasn't an injury that he went in for surgery for. It was just like a preventative surgery. They wanted to go in and get something everything fixed up, maybe pushing it a little bit close in terms of the kickoff of the regular season, but it feels like right now would be an appropriate time to bring him back without a huge risk of re-aggravation. So to see JC back is going to be a big deal, and again, we're going to cover that in just a minute. Outside of that, we got Austin Johnson, who's been practicing in full. He should be fine. Corey Linsley, who last I heard is expected to start on Sunday. This is a hugely impactful piece of news right here. As if you guys have been paying attention to, let's say, the offense and Justin Herbert, with Corey Linsley on the field, it feels like this offense is much different. Of course, a lot of that has to do with communication. If your quarterback's got, let's say, another quarterback on that line that can help you, shift and arrange and prepare for different, defenses, things are a lot easier on your quarterback. And I feel like Corey Linsley is a hugely important part of this offensive line. He did not practice on Friday, but he has been getting limited practices in. And last I heard, Brandon Staley does expect him to suit up on Sunday. So that could be pretty big. And the last bit of news here, Donald Parham, I think he's very close. He did practice in full on Friday. Last I heard, again, he is not going to be suiting up this game. They want to give him one more week healing that hamstring before making his return versus the Browns next week. So those are your Chargers updates on your injury report. I feel like Keenan Allen's going to definitely be one that's felt, but additionally, we cannot put aside the significance of a Corey Linsley, J.C. Jackson making their returns. Outside of that, for your Houston Texans, there are quite a few names on this list. I feel like there's more, players that are going to play than there are not. But like Austin Deculis, Farrell Brown, Kurt Hinch. I don't know if there's too many huge names. Brevin Jordan could kind of be that one big guy that maybe they're going to miss it quite a bit. But other than that, I feel like the Texans more so than not should be suiting up at pretty good health in terms of their biggest playmakers on Sunday. So that's what to look forward to there. With that out of the way, guys, let's talk about, in my opinion, one of the more significant storylines this week, okay? And that's going to be this Chargers offensive line. We saw what happened to Justin Herbert on this O-line when Storm Norton stepped onto the field at left tackle, and it feels like the Chargers understand that situation pretty well, and they've at least taken action to prevent that on Sunday. Let's talk about the move for the Chargers in terms of taking their rookie left guard, Jamari Sawyer, and moving him to left tackle, confirmed starting this week at the position. This is pretty significant, okay? And if you guys were around during the draft, after the draft, all this coverage this offseason in terms of this offensive line, I was screaming praise for Jamari Sawyer, one of the biggest steals of the draft, falling to the Chargers in the 6th round. Nobody understood why Jamari Sawyer did not get drafted, let's say, in the top 4 rounds of the NFL draft. He looked absolutely fantastic, and now he'll finally get the chance to prove it on the Chargers this week while starting at Justin Herbert's blind side versus the Houston Texans, which again is going to be a pretty big test because they have a pretty nice defensive line. Now, for those of you guys who are asking, well, Director, he's a guard. Why is he going to be starting for the Chargers at tackle? Well, in his collegiate career, very versatile offensive line, going up against some pretty stiff competition. And I feel that even though he hasn't taken very many reps this offseason in terms of practice at the left tackle position, he's more than ready to step up into that responsibility because of his responsibility in his collegiate career. It all does kind of make sense. And to be honest, I love this decision by the coaching staff, even if I'm honestly just a little bit shocked. I expected the Chargers to go out there and sign a guy at right or left tackle, to maybe even move Matt Filer before considering moving their rookie to the left tackle position. But in the end, I think this may be the best decision that they could have made on such short notice. Sure, a lot of us wanted to see Eric Fisher. That definitely did have its upside as well. But I do believe that Jamari Sawyer is more than up to the task of stepping into that role. Now, again, he's a fantastic pass protector. If you guys are wondering what he was before coming into the NFL, a fantastic pass protector who maybe lacked a little bit of fluidity in terms of run blocking. But outside of that, he was very good at in pass protection in terms of those statistics on the offensive line. And I do feel like keeping Norton off the field is an absolute must. So why not try a guy that you have in-house that does prove, at least in his collegiate career, that he can protect your franchise quarterback? If anything, I'm going to say let's step back and see what happens. I think the upside in terms of Jamari Sawyer is enough to get me excited to see what he can do. And again, a great on-the-roster solution for the Chargers. But we need to keep our expectations realistic. Even though I'm super high on his talent, super high on what he can bring to the team, He's not going to be Rashawn Slater out there, and that's the biggest thing I fear in terms of, us seeing him go out there and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, this guy's a disaster. Let's get him off of the field. Let's wait and see, because for one, he's trying to fill some pretty big shoes in Rashawn Slater, and two, we're going up against a pretty premium pass rushing team this week in the Houston Texans. Of course, the Texans are a struggling franchise. They're kind of rebuilding, trying to figure out their identity in the league. But as of right now, they rank 4th in terms of sacks. I think they have 10 sacks on the season so far, which is not a small number. So it's going to be a very big test for Jamari Sawyer, stepping into that responsibility for the first time in the NFL, while also not getting a lot of reps at left tackle during the offseason, if that all makes sense. So bottom line, I'm very high on Jamari Sawyer. I believe in Sawyer. I think, me personally, he's going to step onto the field and show us that he's a well above average left tackle in terms of pass protection. Maybe not so much in the run game, but in terms of pass protection, I think we can definitely trust Justin Herbert with them. But we also have to keep our expectations realistic in terms of the kind of competition he'll be facing this week. Now, next up, this is also a pretty important topic to cover, because I feel like it was a huge point of emphasis this offseason. And, of course, the boat did get shaken just a little bit because of the injury to Joey Bosa. This next segment's called Steady the Ship for Pressure. Now, the Texans, like I've mentioned, had a really good defensive line. Well, what they also really do tout is a very nice offensive line. Their offensive line is pretty dang good. And this is going to be a big test for the Chargers, who are now Joey Bosa-less here in Week 4. But if we can prove that this unit can thrive with Khalil Mack, who's still going to be out there making some plays for the Bolts, I feel like we're going to be in a good spot. But the player to definitely highlight in this week's matchup is going to be Chris Rumph, who's going to be stepping in for the injured Joey Bosa. Now, on one hand, man, I feel like Chris Rumph had a great preseason. He showed a lot of upside, a lot of growth and progression from his rookie year the previous season. I feel like he definitely can show signs of holding his own in this situation. Maybe Matt can even find space to get free if Chris Rumph can step up in there and limit those double and triple teams on the opposite side. Now, meanwhile, with the Chargers, let's say, trying to figure things out on their defensive line, what's going on with the Houston Texans and how they handle pressure? Well, again, they have a great offensive line, but what about their quarterback when that pressure does make its way through? The Texans quarterback, Davis Mills, has not been off to the greatest start this season, okay? He looked fantastic last year. Of course, a lot of us were firsthand witnesses to that. But this season, it hasn't really been the same story for Davis Mills. And this could be a great situation for the Chargers, who have a banged-up pass rusher position right now, because if they can penetrate, if they can infiltrate that tough offensive line of the Texans, Mills is more than likely going to toss a few balls up that he really wished that he did not. And now with J.C. Jackson back in the fold, that obviously could be the recipe for success on defense. But again, I feel like so much of the defensive philosophy in rebuilding this defense last year was hindered on and hinged on, can the Chargers increase their turnover ratio? And I feel like a lot of that starts at your edge rusher position. If the Chargers can find a way to supplement that this week, I feel like they can find great success in trying to turn over a quarterback like Davis Mills and at least buy themselves time for Joey Bosa to return sometime in Week 9. Now, how do we help that? Well, this next segment, great segue I might add, is called Man-to-Man. Okay, and this is where things could get exciting for the Chargers, because they do have a backup plan. I know it's kind of hard to believe with everything that we saw last week, but I do think there is a plan B in terms of the Chargers ultimately maintaining that goal of increasing their turnover ratio, improving that stat. And I think that starts with the return of J.C. Jackson. I feel like a lot of people have softened on their position or their opinions of J.C. Jackson because of that nasty game he had versus the Kansas City Chiefs. And in my opinion, I think it was maybe a little bit early to bring him back. Of course, all of us were super excited, but it was pretty obvious that he was still working his way back into the NFL in that recovery time. And I do think that one big play that we're all pointing out, you know, the blown coverage versus the backup tight end, he was supposed to have some help over the top via safety in that play. All that being said, I think the return of JC, we need to be pretty excited about this, man. This is a huge point of emphasis that I wanted to make this offseason, was the strength of our corners in man coverage. Okay, this is something that I have been screaming from the hilltops since the Chargers went and picked up JC this offseason. Now, JC is one of the league's best man coverage corners in the NFL. Okay, so let's start with him. That's the biggest thing that was like, man, I think the Chargers got a plan this year. I think they want to move into a lot more man coverage. JC is one of the best in the league. Asante Samuel Jr. was drafted with huge upside in man coverage. Callahan is considered a slot corner, and of course, Derwin can run with the best of them in man coverage. I think, even given the Chargers situation right now, if the corners can step onto the field and stick to their receivers, this could in turn buy time for the edge rushers to get to the quarterback. They kind of go hand in hand, right? They help each other out. This could help the Chargers massage our issues in terms of our banged up edge position. We can trust these guys to stick to receivers, make, Davis Mills sweat a little bit in the pocket, force a couple of bad throws, maybe a bit more underneath. Again, this could result in more dump-offs underneath, I do believe, and our DBs have done a great job at cleaning those up. But this is where I feel even our linebackers could get involved as well. Keep those gaps vulnerable, right? Clean runs and dump offs in terms of getting to the ball carrier. I feel JC's return, hopefully coming back in full health, he can show us why he was such a huge signing for the Chargers this offseason. And again, if the DBs can step up and if the Chargers utilize them properly in terms of man-to-man coverage, I feel it will definitely help the Chargers pass rush. Even missing Joey Bosa, get some extra time to get to that quarterback. And I think that's exactly why the Chargers handpicked the guys they wanted to add to the roster in terms of JC and Bryce Callahan, who, all of these guys have a ton of upside in terms of what they can do out there in man-to-man. Next up, let's talk a little bit about the offense. Now, I think the biggest point of emphasis this week is going to be how do the Chargers survive without number 13 on the field? Of course, number 13 being their number one wide receiver. So this next segment is called Find a Way to Survive Without Keenan. Now, Keenan's going to be out again this week, which blows, especially with so much hope that he would be returning in week 4. And we've seen a lot of struggle in this offense in his absence, right? We've got to move those chains, and it feels like it's so much easier to do so with Slayer on the field. But I view a few ways that the Chargers can, help supplement this, at least survive without Keenan for the next couple of weeks, maybe hopefully only this week. Which in the end, this could also help get Mike Williams open a little bit more. I know a lot of us were worried about, what's going on with Mike Williams? How come we haven't schemed him open? I think a lot of that does have to do with play calling, but as well, we did see a lot of double coverage on Mike Williams last week, which of course, when you're going up against a 6'4", pretty decently fast wide receiver, defensively, you're going to want to throw more resources at that, especially while they're missing their wide receiver one. Either way, I feel like there's ways to do this. The two guys I want to highlight right now are Josh Palmer, who you see on the screen, and DeAndre Carter, both of which have shown huge upside, okay? DeAndre Carter in the offseason and Josh Palmer throughout the last 2 years. You can use Josh Palmer in similar ways you use Keenan Allen. Sure, he's nowhere near the talent of Keenan Allen, but you can trust him with a lot of those same plays. Try to start implementing and pushing, Josh Palmer into that role of the chain mover. He does have very crisp route running. The Chargers drafted him because of his upside versus the nation's best DBs at the time of his NFL draft. He is a very, very good wide receiver. We just need to trust him in that role a little bit more. Meanwhile, number 1 on the team, DeAndre Carter, he's turned into the Chargers' biggest deep threat on the roster. Of course, Jalen Guyton probably has a little bit more upside because he does possess more speed, but you can start dialing a lot of the same plays up that we found success with in the past by supplementing Keenan's role with Josh Palmer and Jalen Guyton's role with DeAndre Carter. But keep Palmer out there as your chain mover. I think that's going to be a pretty big point this week. Carter, or Palmer's going to be your chain mover. Carter's going to be your deep threat. Mike's going to be your 50-50 guy. Trust your players to get the job done. And these players, like I mentioned, these guys carry very similar traits to our injured stars right now. We may yet survive another week without our wide receiver 1 and Keenan Allen if the Chargers offense, Joe Lombardi, if they can trust the guys they have on the team to do the jobs that need to be done. I feel like it was not any coincidence that they went out there and got guys with similar traits to the other, superstars on this roster. Let's just try and trust these guys a little bit more this week. That's not all I think the Chargers can do in terms of offense and trying to buy time for Keenan Allen. I think the Chargers may have a secret weapon this week to attack a Houston Texans with an obvious defensive flaw. Okay? And this is a pretty exciting segment for me. This segment's called This Week's Secret Weapon. Now, this Texans team has a trait that could be their downfall this season. Okay, I think they've had a pretty decent defense for the most part, but I think they've had one thing that has been very lacking, and their tackling is definitely going to be the culprit here. Their tackling has been extremely poor through the first 3 weeks of this season, and that could be something the Chargers could exploit. Their defensive line has been great, but once the ball has traveled to the second level and beyond, it gets really ugly out there very, very quickly. I think even specifically in the fourth quarter. And the Chargers do possess a secret weapon they could lean on to further expose this weakness. Can you guys guess the name I'm about to say here, who's currently on the Chargers roster? Maybe a bit of a sleeper for most people in terms of fantasy football. His name is Gerald Everett. And this man is one of the league's nastiest tight ends after contact. Ooh, dudes. I don't know about you, man, but this one makes a whole lot of sense to me. If I'm Joe Lombardi this week, I am looking to number 7 a lot as a featured weapon. Because this dude, like we've seen all offseason, like we've seen in his tape, like we saw in his time with the Seattle Seahawks and the Los Angeles Rams, as soon as you get the ball in this guy's hands, he turns into Marshawn Lynch. Just trucking dudes over, stiff arms, running through contact. This dude's a dog. And I feel that Everett has also, just for the Chargers this season, shown that and proved that already. He's been solid when called upon. 125 yards-ish and a touchdown through the first 3 weeks is very nice for a tight end. And I feel Everett could have a big, big day if the Chargers recognize the weakness of the Houston Texans. If I were Joe, I'd be looking to make that happen. Get the ball into the hands of your featured yak player, right? And let him make plays versus a defense that has been struggling to tackle the first 3 weeks. I think only good things can happen. So if you guys are looking for a guy that I think could maybe have a solid week, maybe come out of nowhere and be like, yo, what, this Gerald Everett guy, man, who knew he was the answer to missing a Keenan Allen? I think this is the way you attack the Houston Texans. Through the air, featuring Gerald Everett, trying to, move the chains with your wide receivers, but I would move the offense through Gerald Everett and Justin Herbert this week. But that's just my opinion. Again, I'm not an X's and O's guy, but just looking at what the Texans would give us and looking at that situation, looking who we have on the roster, I think it's honestly Everett. You can sprinkle in some Austin Eckler as well. I feel very good about that one. So in our last segment here, let's talk a little bit about Austin Eckler. It's time to unleash this man. Okay. Now, of course, I do think number 7 is the guy I'm going to be trying to pushing into the limelight this week. But I think it's time to talk a little bit about Eck, because this season has definitely not started the way that we all expected for number 30. And this is probably the trickiest aspect to this week's game too. Because again, Eckler maybe being a little underwhelming to start the year. I don't know if I fully blame him for that, though. I feel like the play calling has been extremely bizarre in trying to feature perhaps your best offensive weapon, maybe outside of Keenan Allen. I think the dude is still Austin Eckler on this roster. And it's really strange to see the offense try to not run through him, especially in the absence of Keenan Allen. And at this point, I think Joe Lombardi knows that his play calling is in some way responsible for that. There was an article posted, I think by Bolt Beat a couple of days ago, showing that Joe Lombardi does, of course, recognize his fault in terms of the play calling. I do think Austin Eckler has been one of the biggest victims of that poor play calling. And what's crazy to me, because I feel like Joe Lombardi can be really good, right? He found great success with Alvin Kamara in New Orleans the previous year before joining the Chargers. And for a while, it really seemed like he was successful at implementing those same ideologies and strategies with Austin Eckler. Eckler was a fantasy superstar last year. But this year, it doesn't seem to be the same case. Why has he moved away from it these last 3 weeks? I want to see the Chargers' best offensive weapon back in his full glory. And that's going to be a lot of shifting and change for Joe Lombardi. And not even so much change in terms of, trying something new, but going back to what works. You know what I mean? With the Chargers' run game continuing to struggle, too, in terms of how you use Austin Eckler, I don't see this week as the game they get back on track on the ground, because the Texans, again, are very tough up front. But with Austin Eckler, you don't have to do that necessarily. Sure, try and establish something on the ground if you can, and get yards where you can, but you got to throw the ball to Austin Eckler anyway, because he's a receiving back. Get him involved, whether or not you want to run or not, right? In my opinion, again, it's kind of cut and dry for me. I don't know how you guys feel about it, but I feel like the Chargers should run on the ground with their backups in Sony Michel, Joshua Kelly. Try and get Isaiah Spiller involved, for the love of all that's holy. but keep Austin Eckler available for all them passing downs, because you survive, or you stand a much better chance at surviving and moving the chains with Austin Eckler out there on passing downs than you do with Sony Michel, JK, or even Isaiah Spiller. Keep this man out there. So I don't know. Let's see what we can do to get Austin Eckler more involved in this offense. I think your chances of success go way up when number 30 is being utilized properly and taken full advantage of in terms of what he can bring in terms of production. So finally, let's get the score prediction on the board. Of course, we've been hoping for the best, preparing for the worst. Even so, in these losses, I don't feel like my score predictions have been too far off. So let's see if we can finally get one right this week. My score prediction for the Chargers at Houston Texans this week is going to be Chargers 25, Texans 13. I think that's pretty telling to how I think this game's going to go. The bottom line in this one, I think, is I feel like this week is going to show us that the season is not over. Yeah, last week was awful, okay? And it definitely showed signs of panic by a lot of us fans. I was sure as heck panicking. And sure, the Texans are a formidable opponent. They're very underrated, especially on defense. But I can't help but feel the Chargers took a lot from last week's collapse versus the Jags. I think a lot of lessons were learned. And even with so many stars missing, I feel like we have more than enough to survive without them for right now. And we do have guys coming back. I feel like the return of JC and Lindsley is hugely significant. Bosa's going to be back around week 7 or 9. We just got to buy them some time. Keenan can be back any day now. And again, with Lindsley and JC back, we should start to see the bounce back begin. We just need to buy these players more time. A lot is on the shoulders of Joe Lombardi this week too, might I add. He's got to make that happen offensively. But I believe this team is more than up to the task, and I think the Chargers may find some momentum in salvaging what is considered a slow start, a collapse last week, into a very successful season, which honestly, the Chargers, you're crazy if you think they're not in the wild card race, if they're not in the playoff race, and if they're healthy by that time, and there's even hope for a Rashawn Slater at that point, if they're healthy at that time, watch out for the Chargers in the postseason. They got a lot of things to sort out before then, and I think it starts right here, right now with the Houston Texans. So you guys let me know in the comment section below. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining me. Let me know what you guys think of this game and who you think is going to be some of the more important players to feature in this game in the comment section below. If you guys did enjoy what you saw here, hit us up with a like and sub on your way out. This has been The Director. We'll see you next time, and as always, bolt up and stay frosty. I'm telling you guys right now, it's going to be a big Gerald Everett day.